You want somebody in that fractional role that has done this exact scenario before. And when I say exact scenario, I don't mean just in the industry, but in your exact niche with the same type of product, same deal structure, same decision makers on the other end of the sales process, same length of sales cycle, same deal size, same ownership structure of the company. So those are a few boxes that I would always want to see checked in order to say somebody has done this scenario before. And that person can step in and with very little ramp up time can be successful because they inherently bring all the know-how to the table. But then, of course, in the execution, there are many opportunities for this to go sideways. The biggest one that I see is just lack of communication. You need to be communicating on an ongoing basis. The executive should never assume that the person who brought them in knows what they're doing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Business, Your Next Level. I'm your host, Eunicia Peret, and today I have Henning Schwinum with me in the studio. He is a creative and very much results-oriented driver, founder, and executive. He's worked domestically, he's worked internationally, as well as in corporate and entrepreneurial settings. Henning launched Vendux in 2019 as the matchmaker for fractional sales leadership. And 6 years later, Vendux is the only agency with a focus on CRO, CSO, or VPs of sales roles. They represent the largest community of over 1,400 sales leaders in North America. That all in itself is a huge accomplishment, Henning, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to Your Business, Your Next Level.
Thank you, Eunicia. Great to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Tell us, how did you get the vision to start such a magnificent company with such, obviously there's a lot of boldness behind it, because what we know is a lot of fractional sales organizations are very focused on the CRO function or maybe the sales function specifically, but to really kind of cross the gamut is not something that we see often. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, I initially never thought of myself as an ideator who could come up with an idea that was big enough to actually allow you to build a company and a business around it. For many years, I was an executor. I joined startups and very early on and executed somebody else's vision for building the business. And in 2019, I was done with that line of work. I had spent 25 years building, leading sales teams around the world. And at that point, wanted to become a fractional executive. I'd heard of the concept. I thought it was interesting to take my skills into a company and build something on a part-time basis, but then, leave behind a better state of affairs in the realm of sales. But I quickly realized that I wasn't well connected enough. I didn't know enough founders, owners, CEOs, board members, investors in order to find these roles easily. And when I looked around for an agency or a matchmaker who could help me, I couldn't find one because there wasn't one that had a focus on sales. There were those who represented the entire C-suite, but I didn't feel represented. And so, that was my eureka moment where I thought, that's the business idea that I've been looking for. Let's build a business around it. And the initial simple product market fit assumption was that what I was missing, others must be missing too. A few phone calls proved that to be absolutely true.
Henning, the story that you just shared resonates very deeply with me, because that's exactly what happened when Excelstra was first born. I started seeing a lot of the things that people could focus on continuing to perfect, if you will, in the financial realm. And as that continued on, what we realized was that there's no support out there to transcend between the different areas of the financial house, if you will, at an individual as well as a business level, especially if we were to transcend the two. Everything from tax all the way to the investment side, all the way to the legal and even exit strategies. And so same thing, like you started making phone calls, started talking to individuals. And what we realized is that it's not a thing out there. And the reason it's not a thing, it wasn't a thing, it's still not a thing, is because it's really hard to execute. The execution is where
Mhm.
everything comes together, right? It's a beautiful, what do we call it? It's a beautiful mechanism. Talk to
Yeah.
us a little bit about the mechanism that makes your company shine. And I would also love, Henning, if you could go into what are the different executive sales roles that
Yeah.
larger enterprises and entrepreneurs should even be aware of, because most of them, they just know there's a sales function and there are some people. How are those individuals and those specific roles differentiated?
Mhm.
Let's start there.
There are a lot of questions wrapped into what you just asked. Let me start with the question of where do you find fractional executives and especially fractional sales leaders? And you don't find them in Fortune 1000 company. Also, probably even beyond Fortune 1000 companies over $100 million in revenue, they typically don't engage fractional executives because their leadership functions are too big to be fractionalized. The idea behind a fractional executive is to look at a function and ask the question, how much of that executive function do you need? And in sales, if you run a small sales team of 3 or 4 salespeople, you don't need a full-time sales leader. What often happens is that you put somebody in place that is a player coach that leads the sales team but has an individual quota. And anytime you put multiple hats onto somebody's head, you're actually putting them at a disadvantage because we tend to be, as humans, we tend to be good at one thing, but we don't tend to be good at a number of different things. And in the startup, scale up world, being scrappy and wearing multiple hats and doing a lot of different things is a badge of honor, but it's also a total waste of resources and talent. So the idea would be to say, I need somebody just for leadership function. Maybe it's 10 or 15 hours a week, and now I'm contracting that skill set. And when we talk about sales leaders, we talk about titles that involve sales, business development, growth, revenue, sales or revenue operations. From a title perspective, some of these roles are C-suite roles like CRO, CSO, VP of sales. In some organizations, a sales leader is a director of sales. So that's sort of the realm of roles that we staff at Vendux through our talent. And the clients we have are anywhere from pre-revenue to about 100 million, but the majority of fractional sales leadership assignments sit in the $1 to $20 million AR or ARR range, because that's where you have companies that can fractionalize their sales leadership and be successful. If you have a team of 10 or 15 salespeople, you need a full-time sales leader. That is not a function that you can easily fractionalize.
You articulated it so beautifully, and you took us on a journey of here are the companies that typically can benefit from fractional executive leadership. Here are the different types of roles that you might be looking at. And then you also said something that was very critical. And I'd like to pause on that just for a brief second. Is this is in my own words, too many individuals they'll bring in a sales coach as an example. And that sales coach somehow, some way, overnight, they end up having sales metrics as well. And something that we learned early on is that just because someone is good at coaching sales, that does not translate well into actual sales because the skill sets are very different. Talk to us a little bit about some of the examples. So maybe you can share some examples or some unique ways in which our listeners can think about when they're thinking about their sales organization. What are the pitfalls that you're seeing so that we can not go and continue to do the same thing? Because what we know is that when we don't continue in the situation that we've always done, we're leaving room, we're opening up opportunities for the next level of awesomeness to come in. Talk to
Yeah.
us a little bit about what are some of those pitfalls.
Yeah. To first piggyback on your example of a coach that is not a good sales leadership operator, the same is true for a great individual contributor who's not a great sales leader. And so that's definitely one of the pitfalls that founders, owners, and CEOs tend to go towards, where they have a great salesperson that often delivers a bulk of the revenue for the company, And then they think that if they make them the sales leader, that they could, transform the rest of the team and, convey how they are doing it onto others. But that requires that individual contributor is also a great leader. And in many cases, they're not. Fractional executives are brought in to solve problems. If I think of executive recruiting in general, I always think of an org chart that has an empty box. And now an executive recruiter is tasked to fill that empty box with a body and a person. Fractional executives aren't brought in that way. They're brought in to solve a problem. And so in sales, common scenarios that we encounter is a founder-led or owner-led sales effort, where the founder or owner leads sales or leads a sales team, but they're not a professional. Most of them have never done sales or led a sales team before. So they're basically imparting the way that they have done sales, and some of them have done it very successfully, onto others and expect them to just execute the same sales motion, and it should be delivering the same outcomes. And that's not true. If you go about selling as a founder or owner, it's a very different process. It's a very different picture. It's a very different story to a client. So, that's a typical scenario transition away from founder or owner-led sales. Other scenarios are that teams are stuck. They've sold mid-market and now are being tasked to sell into enterprise, and they just don't have the experience, or they don't have the seniority to be able to execute enterprise sales. We've had another scenario where a client had a sales team of about 20 salespeople. There was no consistent process. Every salesperson just did their own thing and was somewhat successful in their own right. But now they decided, if we hire more salespeople, we need a playbook, we need a training manual. And so they brought in a fractional executive to look at all 20 processes that they had, distill the best practices, create a playbook and a training manual, and then teach it back to the existing team and then to all the new hires. These are all scenarios where fractional executives are able to excel and bring their expertise to the table. And you can think of just about any problem that exists in sales, and you can think about an executive that brings the right expertise to the table to solve that problem and make the company successful.
What are the most typical types of sales executive roles that you see companies that are kind of getting outside of either founder owner led organizations or organizations that, well, let's start there. What are some of the biggest needs that a founder owner type of an organization has when they're thinking or they're actively scaling their sales organization?
Yeah. So founder or owner-led sales efforts are often marked by lack of systems, lack of process, lack of consistency, lack of professionalism. Because again, founders and owners that have never led sales team, most of them are technology experts. They are engineers. They are phenomenal at designing products, and they're good at selling them because they stand there as the founder of the company, as the inventor of the product, as the owner. And of course, they're good, but imparting the right way of selling to others is a different animal. And sales teams require process and structure. It's not about saying, just do what I've been doing. There needs to be a real process behind it, from lead gen efforts to warming up potential opportunities, to going through the sales process and the sales motion, to closing, to providing the right customer service so that renewal and upselling opportunities exist. So that entire process is something that needs to be mapped out, that needs to be scripted, that needs to be supported by the right tech stack, and then sales teams can be successful. And founders, owners don't think about it this way, because they started out as a one-person show, just selling their solution themselves, and their way of training was, do as I say or do as I do, and hoping that the reps that they hired would become successful.
Is it more advisable for let's say, a business owner-led organization to hire a sales team first? I see a lot of organizations, they'll have marketing teams in place. They'll have,
Mhm.
individuals that are supporting the delivery on the client side. They'll have a resonance of a client journey, right? However it's been working for them. If they're thinking about bringing on a sales team, maybe they even have an external sales team, but now they're thinking of bringing it internally. How do they go about that? Do they look for a fractional leadership support on the marketing side, on the sales side first, or do they hire someone first and then they bring in the support?
Mhm.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, the ideal scenario is you start at the top. So you bring in a leader first, and doing it fractionally means you may bring them in 6 or 8 or 10 hours a week. So on a very limited basis, but they create the structure and the process first. They test it out, make sure it works, and then they bring in people, the right people, and train and coach those individuals. That, in my mind, is the right process to go about this. The reality is often different because these young businesses are between a rock and a hard place. They need to immediately generate revenue. And so they often bring in somebody that I would label like a founding account executive. So somebody who has a little bit of experience in building out structure and systems, but is not necessarily a full-blown sales leader and has never led a full-blown sales team. And then they expect that person on a fractional basis to do two things: to sell and deliver revenue and customers. And while they're doing it, build out a process, build out the collateral, build out the tech stack. And while that is a doable thing, there are companies who've gone through this successfully. It is also something where you really need the right person. This isn't something that any account executive, any salesperson can do. And so many founders and owners cycle through 2 or 3 different teams that way until they find the right person, but also with it the right sales motion. It's so that they can bring this all together. In hindsight, often, you can look back and say it would have been better if I had started with somebody more senior at the beginning with a sole focus on, putting the right systems and processes in place. But, hindsight is always 2020.
Always is, Henning. I'm so appreciative for you mentioning that, because it always is. And people say, I wish I could have, would have. It's like, just
Yeah.
pause for a moment, figure out what, sometimes if we even just listen to what feels right versus what doesn't feel right, we can make the decisions that we make are far superior versus just going with, whatever somebody or something comes across our paths. Talk to us, Henning, a little bit about how does an executive, how does a business owner make a fractional executive successful? And the reason I ask this is because I'm sure you've seen it. Oftentimes the fractional executive comes in, kind of start getting their charter and the request from the business owner, but if the business owner doesn't have experience with that particular role, oftentimes the misalignment in the guidance that the fractional executive receives is automatically going to derail the opportunity for true and ultimate success. How can business owners avoid that by being strategic, and what do they need to do?
There are obviously a lot of factors. I mean, one that we can't really detail here in this call is the whole human factor, right? Two humans working together, there's always room for conflict and misunderstanding and misalignment. But there are, of course, a few things that I believe can be done on both sides and together to make an assignment successful. And to me, it starts with the finding the right executive, the selection of who you're bringing in. And oftentimes I see CEOs or founders, owners follow advice that they've received from peers. You should work with Joe because Joe has done a great job for me. I think he'd be good for you as well. Or they call it culture fit. I call it likability, somebody that resonates with them on a personal level. Neither one of those two scenarios, in my mind, brings in the right talent, or at least doesn't guarantee that it's the right talent. For me, it's to look at past experiences. You want somebody in that fractional role that has done this exact scenario before. And when I say exact scenario, I don't mean just in the industry, but in your exact niche with the same type of product, same deal structure, same decision makers on the other end of the sales process, same length of sales cycle, same deal size, same ownership structure of the company. So those are a few boxes that I would always want to see checked in order to say somebody has done this scenario before. And that person can step in and with very little ramp up time can be successful because they inherently bring all the know-how to the table. But then, of course, in the execution, there are many opportunities for this to go sideways. The biggest one that I see is just lack of communication. You need to be communicating on an ongoing basis. The executive should never assume that the person who brought them in knows what they're doing. The CEO, owner, founder should never assume that they know what the executive is working on. It needs to be continuous communication. If there is a weekly call, then that call should focus on what did I work on this past week? What will I work on the next week? And what do you, CEO, need to do for me in order to be successful? What are the roadblocks you need to clear out of the way? And that way, everyone's on the same page. And if there is need for course correction, it can be done right away. And most assignments that I see fall apart because initially they were all excited and communicating really well, and they were really happy. The CEO was happy that finally there was somebody there who was successful, and the executive was happy because they always wanted to work in a company just like that. And then things started to go sideways and they drifted apart because they didn't communicate. And so to me, that is a key thing to do during an assignment. I mean, it should almost be unspoken that you also need full transparency, right? If the executive doesn't know all the details in the company, if it takes 2 months for them to get access to critical systems, if they were being told incorrect facts in the initial process, just so that the owner could save face, that doesn't help it either. So full transparency is another thing that needs to be in place. And I'm waving a little flag here, if I may. I wrote a book on this exact topic, how to make fractional executive assignments successful. It's called Right Sized, Right Skilled, and it's available on Amazon.
Right sized, right skilled
Correct.
is the book that Henning you're mentioning. I encourage everyone that has even remote questions about how to structure their, not just your sales organization, because we're talking a lot about that, but just your executive team overall. I commented, I've seen it on the fractional CFO side, so much so that one of our clients at one point in time, they said, but Eunicia, you know exactly what the fractional CFO is doing. Can your team just do it? And I said, we could. If we did, we would fall out of alignment with the things that we do. Our role is to make sure that everybody's working and collaborating as they should, so that we can anticipate and we can see any potential challenges before they ever come up, and we can be proactive about them. And the client came back foreshadowing a few months later, and the question was, how did you know? Because I've seen it. It's not about it. When people step into each other, into somebody else's field, what the business owners don't understand, and you pointed it out earlier, is that it's not actually more help. In the long run, it can be significantly more detrimental. And we're seeing that with attorneys playing, quote unquote, playing quarterback, financial quarterback for the client, yet they don't understand anything about financial products, anything about taxes. Yet they are gatekeepers, or CPAs being gatekeepers, and nobody else comes into the realm. It's like, you don't understand the law side. You don't understand the investment side. You don't understand the maximizing exits. So why don't we just, everybody does their thing? And you articulated that beautifully with the roles of the executives. So definitely the book. I love it. Talk to us a little bit about starting an industry association, Henning. I'm looking at the clock and we're having a lot of fun. I'm learning a ton. Thank you. And I'd love to know from your standpoint a little bit about industry associations. It's not a topic that comes up often.
No, the fractional industry overall is new, right? The model existed initially with fractional CFOs maybe 10 years ago, but they weren't even called fractional at the time. And then all the other functions developed, and it really got a boost through COVID when remote work and when contract work became accepted in all companies by virtue of, the shutdown. And so it's a new industry, and all the companies in it are small. I always use the example of the search engine industry, right? If you want to talk to the search engine industry, talk to Google, because everybody else copies what Google does. But in the fractional industry, everyone is small, everyone is insignificant, and there is no company that could claim that they are a leader. But the ecosystem has people like me who are matchmakers, it has directories, it has software providers that provide particular software, it has education providers for fractional executives, it has communities for fractional executives. And so all these companies and organizations are embarked on a education process because, something this new doesn't automatically come to mind when companies face issues and problems. And so we need to tell the story about how fractional executives can help. And over the years, myself and others have realized that we're much better off if we work together and pool our voices. And about 2 years ago, 10 companies in this space came together and said, let's form an industry association, the Fractional Leadership Alliance. And we bring together initially the companies in this space so that we can speak with one voice and we can speak louder and we can speak at a different level. We're not there promoting a particular business, but we're here as an industry association that is a nonprofit and that can speak to other industry associations, for example, and that can publish papers that are then being quoted and cited by others. And so that's the idea behind the Fractional Leadership Alliance. We're about 2 years old. We have members now, not only in the US, but also in Canada, in New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Dubai, Lebanon, soon in Europe and in the UK. So a truly global industry association that brings together initially the companies, the organizations in the space, but as supporting members, also the individual solopreneurs.
That is beautiful. Obviously, you started deep, really understanding the problem within the industry, and then you branched wide in order to give other companies an opportunity to, for themselves, go in deeper as they're supporting their clients. And that is just so beautiful to hear, Henning. One of the questions that I love to ask is the idea of failure, prior failure, perceived prior failure, because most individuals have learned that failures are really blessings in disguise. Talk to us about what is or what was one of those perceived failures. How did you get around it or through it, and what did it teach you?
Yeah. When people ask, how successful is Vendux, my standard answer is that I say pays the bills around here and has been for 6.5 years now. So based on that, there's a certain level of success. But of course, that journey wasn't a straight line. That journey was one where along the way, I did a lot of things wrong, and I will continue to do a lot of things wrong and hopefully learn from them. Investment, for example, in marketing or lead gen channels that just did not work out. So in the case of a fractional executive, for example, there's no point in calling up a CEO and saying, hey, Mr. CEO, do you need a fractional executive? It just doesn't work. You can try to look from the outside in and say, do they have a sales leader? Where are they in their growth journey? Have they recently fired a sales leader? Have they recently received investment? But because of the novelty of the model, in my observation, these triggers have a very, very limited validity and only have marginally better conversion rates than if you just blindly call every CEO or every founder. And so, we tried this a lot of different ways, emails, BDR, SDRs, outsourced. And over 6.5 years, it has not delivered the results, even though whoever we worked with was fully convinced that it would. And so, yeah, there have been failed investments like that that I've learned through, but I've also, have survived those. And we have, in the course of trial and error, identified the things that work and have repeated those again a few times, and have been able to correct the mistakes that were made along the way and are now on a better course as a result of it. Again, to the point earlier, I'll continue to make mistakes. Absolutely. It's never over. Especially when you try new things, you have to go through a trial and error phase.
I'd love for you to, that was beautiful. And thank you for sharing that, Henning, because it can be humbling for sure. I can speak from experience on that, hiring and bringing on different team members and different functions. And yes, everybody believes that of course it will work at the beginning. Mm. And yet on the other side, sometimes it doesn't. And one of the things that I actually see it when individuals come to us, like they've worked with so many financial professionals and CPAs and investment bankers and, all the titles. And the answer sometimes is they come over and they'll say, it hasn't worked until now. How in the world can this possibly be different? And so because we play a different game, I don't get anybody to say, come on in, we're going to do all this and all that. It's like, listen, we truly play a different game. It's a game that we designed because we looked at all the things that I didn't like about what was happening with my business and in my world. And because of that, we're positioned to deliver the success. It sounds like you did a lot of the same. What would your guidance be to business owners and entrepreneurs out there that have thought about the idea of bringing on fractional support, especially at an executive level, and for whatever reason, they either bounce right back towards, but they'll just bring in somebody that's full-time, or they revert back to doing nothing because of the fear of they've been there, they've done that, they've met perceived failures. Perhaps it might have worked, maybe not really, and they constantly go back. What is the wisdom that you can part with them to let them know that, sometimes trials and errors are a thing, and without those, there is no way that you're going to find what I call utopia?
Yes. So of the two alternative paths, the do nothing is the one that I see more often. Sometimes they do revert back to a full-time hire, but not that often. The do nothing is something I see repeatedly, and it's the hesitation to do something new, to do something different, because often it would have been the first time that they bring in a fraction executive. They don't have the experience. They don't quite know how that works and how that person could possibly be successful. And so they decide to do nothing. And that, frankly, is the worst thing to do, right? Stand still and hoping for some change is not something that will ever lead to success. And if you then, look at existing internal resources as a source of a solution, if they haven't done it so far, what makes you believe that going forward, now they all of a sudden will come up with the right idea? What I think, and this sounds very self-serving, obviously, because I run businesses that are matchmakers, but I would encourage a business owner, a CEO or founder to work with a professional, to work with an organization. Yes, you can easily identify fractional executives on LinkedIn. They all carry the word fractional in their title. They're easy to find. But what's really hard is to understand their true skills and whether they truly bring all the right experiences to the table. And beyond that, do you as a founder or owner or CEO actually know what is required to make somebody successful? Most CEOs, founders, owners I encounter, they know what they want, right? They want this problem to be solved. But what they don't know is what they really need to get that solution in place. What I hear very often is I need somebody from my industry and I need a rock star. And those two labels are truly meaningless, because have you ever seen somebody who labeled themselves as mediocre or average on LinkedIn? No, everyone is a rock star on LinkedIn. Everyone is a rock star in an interview, and especially salespeople and sales executives because they have sold their entire life. They're always the greatest. Everyone is a member of the President's Club and whatever other award their company was giving out. And so a partner like us can help identify somebody that is truly able to solve the problem. We can help identify the criteria that this person needs to meet in order to be successful. And we've done this a few times over the last 6.5 years. And so rely on that expertise, whether that's us or somebody else in the space. Use that expertise to firm up your choice and then make the decision and move forward.
I love everything that you said, Henning. And what I would offer to our listeners is I know that you found huge ideas in here, because what Henning said, a lot of the things that he mentioned, they might sound like they're common sense, and yet people do not talk about them. They're not really as openly discussed for obvious reasons. And so if what you heard really stood out to you and you'd like a personal introduction, just reach out to us and it will be our pleasure to do that and make sure that you guys are connected. So with that, and without further ado, Henning, this has been a very, very informative discussion. I know that I've appreciated it a ton. I'm certain that our listeners will find a lot of value out of it. And as you're listening to this, my ask of you is, please, if Henning has done a great job, which I can vouch for him, he did. I can feel his heart pouring out with love. Do us a favor, leave a review. And very importantly, as you leave the review on our show, let us know what was the one big thing that stood out to you the most from the discussion that we had with Henning, and any questions that you might have. And we'll figure out ways to make sure that they get addressed. And in the meantime, stay tuned for your next episode of Your Business, Your Next Level.
Thank you for joining us on Your Business, Your Next Level podcast, where it is all about helping you make more, keep more, and elevating your business to the next level. To learn more, make sure you head over to www.podcast.excelstra.com and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Again, that's podcast.excelstra.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.